Okay, well, what I want to talk about in this video and the video that's going to follow up on this one is the subject of deism. What I hope to achieve by the end of this video is to have just expanded perhaps. When we talk about deism, we often get quite narrowly focused about what it entails. I would like to expand that somewhat by the end of this video, and have, in doing so, provided some food for thought. In the video that then follows on from this, what I would like to do is to look at some of the ramifications of that expansion and what we can glean from that, how it impacts on other things. First off, I'd like to be quite clear what we're talking about when we're talking about deism. We are talking about one of the subsets of belief that is in contrast with atheism. Atheism contrasts with theism in the larger sense of the word, and that theism includes deism. But deism is in contrast with theism, using theism in the smaller sense of the word. Yes, I know it's a fucking hopeless situation, all of that, but that is what we are stuck with, I am afraid. And in this sense of the word, theism refers to a belief in a God that you could say has the personal touch, belief in a God that plays an active role in the universe, whereas deism refers to the belief in a God that creates the universe and then has nothing to do with it after that point in time. So that is the difference. And when we're talking about God in these cases, there's a whole slew of gods that have been worshipped or believed in over the years. What I'm specifically referring to is a sentient being that has created our universe. That is not to denigrate or delegate other ideas of gods, but that is what we're talking about here. We're talking about a sentient being that has created a universe such as our universe. That being would be a god to any sentient inhabitants that existed within that universe. So that's our starting point. Now the problem is this: when we tend to discuss deism, I suggest that all too often people tend to have a very narrow channeled idea of what that involves. They tend to envisage something along the lines of the God of Abrahamic monotheism, but without the personal touch, without all the extra trimmings. They envisage the qualities of the Abrahamic monotheistic God, but just that it's taking a back seat, that it's not taking an active role in the universe, perhaps something akin to Brahman in Hinduism. So what I want to do in this video is show that there are good grounds for expanding our understanding of what deism could entail. What I'm not doing is making an argument for deism. If I thought I could make a good enough argument for deism, I'd be a deist and not an atheist. But we need to have an appreciation of what's involved, otherwise we're just going to misportray the extent of what deism actually is. So what I want to do is to give you two examples, not looking at our universe, but looking at examples of universes we could create. I read a book by Brian Greene a few years ago where he was talking about the possibility of us seeding universes within our own universes, and to that end I will furnish you in the footnotes with a link to an article about John Gribbin talking about this very thing and about what status that would give us in relation to the universe we had created. But there may be a possibility, depending on just what the actual nature of the physics of the universe is, that we may be able to seed a universe in our laboratories that would expand within our universe, not physically but within its own set of dimensions. It's not as if it would expand and take over our universe physically, but within its own dimensions it would be expanding. We would have seeded a universe that may be quite like our own, if not indistinguishable from our own in everything other than the particulars. I want you to put that to one side, but whilst you're putting that to one side, imagine what our status would be to any sentient beings that existed within that universe. I also want you to consider something that I made a video some years back and always wanted to revisit, which is Nick Bostrom's simulation argument. If you're not familiar with Nick Bostrom's argument, it's a really interesting argument. I cannot go into detail on Nick Bostrom's argument here, but the bare bones of Nick Bostrom's argument is that if all the conditions are available for artificial universes of sufficient fidelity to be created, virtual universes, and populated with artificial intelligences, either pre-made or perhaps evolved in the same way that we've evolved, then his suggestion is that sentient beings such as ourselves would do it more than once. And if those universes themselves evolved sentient beings, then you would have a situation where there would be more artificial universes, more simulated universes than real universes, because every real universe would seed more than one simulation. So his point is that if you look at it from a purely statistical perspective, we are more likely to ourselves be living in a simulated universe than a real universe. It's a really interesting argument and a little bit of a headfuck, and I don't want to go into any more detail in the specifics of his argument here, but I want to draw on his argument. Because look at where we are at now. We love the idea of creating artificial intelligence. We love the idea of creating artificial universes, as will be ably demonstrated next year when the game No Man's Sky is released and sells millions upon millions of copies as everybody explores the artificial procedurally generated universe that they are creating. I contend to you that there is absolutely no doubt, if we had the technology, and maybe in 100 years or 1,000 years or 10,000 years we will have the technology to create artificial universes of sufficient fidelity and allowing them to run their course such that sentient beings evolve in those universes, and those universes look real, at least to the extent of the eyes of those sentient beings that evolve within them, then we will do just that. We will create those universes, and sentient beings will exist in a universe that we have created, and we will be a god to those sentient beings because we will have created their universe. So just think on this for a moment and think of this from the epistemic position of those sentient beings that we've created, that have evolved within this universe that we have created. They can only use the information that's available to them. They're in the same position as we are, and they look out of their windows and they work away in their little simulated laboratories, and they see no evidence for a creator, for an intelligent creator of their universe, any more than we do. And for just the same correct reasons that we assume atheism, they assume atheism. But from our position, from our privileged external position of having created their universe, we can see that in actual point of fact that they are wrong, that there is a God and that we are that God. Now the reason I make this point is not to champion deism, but it is to show that just as this argument applies to these sentient beings in this universe we've created, so it applies to us, and so this is something that we sensibly need to include when we're thinking about ideas of deism and the kind of things that deism could include. And that's the point that I want to draw from this video. That is the outcome that I want to get from this specific video before we move on to the ramifications of all of this, is just to broaden the scope of what we think about when we think about deism, away from this kind of monotheistic, superlative, Abrahamic style God, but without the personal trimmings, and to realise that there's a whole load of conceptual space beyond that, with all other kinds of ideas of God that satisfy the criteria of deism, but which have very different qualities and need to be treated in very different ways. Well, I hope that this particular video has given you some food for thought. I'm sure the next video will give you even more food for thought. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.